Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's Bryn Durgan and I am the Director of Programming here at Bookstore One. And for most of you, I know that it's a welcome back to the bookstore. But for some of you, I know it might be your first time up in the loft. So we want to say another thank you because without customers like all of you, we wouldn't be able to offer even a sliver of the programming that we are able to offer today. So thanks again. But now let me introduce you to the author we're here to celebrate, the Curator of Asian Art at the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art here in Sarasota. She's curated exhibitions including Mountains of the Mind, Scholars' Rocks from China and Beyond, and has published widely on Japanese prints, paintings, textiles, and popular visual culture. Her most recent book, Divine Felines, The Cat in Japanese Art, was published by Tuttle this month, so let's give Rhiannon Paget a big congratulatory round of applause. Welcome, Rhiannon.
Thank you.
And so I figured we'd start tonight off with the most pressing question, which is, are you more of a cat person or a dog person?
This might be an unpopular opinion in this audience, but I actually like both. I've grown up with both dogs and cats, and so my friends who have dogs in this group will know that if I see their dog, I'm going to go in for kisses quite hard. So yeah, dogs and cats.
Okay.
But I do have a cat right now.
What's your cat's name?
My cat's name is Tamsin. She's a little black cat. She's 8 years old from the Cat Depot.
Oh, nice. Shout out to Cat Depot. Can you tell us a little bit about another interesting fact that I had picked up in this book was the first named cat. Can you talk about that a little bit?
The first evidence of a cat with a name comes from sources, so court diaries from about the 10th century, and this cat was given a noble title. She was an imperial pet, and she had kittens, and there was a big shindig around the birth of these kittens. So cats have always been royalty, right? They rule our homes, and there's nothing new about that. That's been going on for 1,000 years in Japan, probably longer. We know what humans are like, and we know what cats are like. It's just that's how that interspecies relationship works. We know who's in control.
So what sort of lit the flame for you writing this book?
So actually, I've always loved images of cats in Japanese art. I think there's such a rich variety of them. But what actually kind of made me think, oh, maybe this could be a book, was so during 2021, I had an exhibition called Saito Kiyoshi, Graphic Awakening, and he did a lot of cat prints, and we had a whole section that was mostly on cats. And a colleague of mine, who's now at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, invited me to give an online talk for her Friends of Asian Art, then at the Chester Beatty Library, on cats. And I was like, really? It's so frivolous. I can't give a whole talk on cats. And she's like, come on, people will love it. And I was like, well, I will lose all professional credibility. And she's like, so you've got nothing to lose then. Let's do it. So it's all her fault. So I started working on this talk, and as I started doing more research for this, it sort of snowballed, and I realized that it was actually such a rich topic. Just so many interesting sources from history, from court diaries, from literature, novels and poetry, and then getting into popular fiction in the Edo period. So that's the early modern period when Japan really starts to sort of develop these sort of great metropolises like Edo, now Tokyo, and then the Kabuki theater. And then again in sort of the 20th century, you get this new burst of cat imagery. A lot of it seems to be influenced by French or European modernism, particularly there's a lot of French modernist cats that seem to sort of find their way into Japanese imagery. So I think you can almost tell the story of Japanese visual culture through the image of the cat. Then it sort of, by the time after I finished giving that talk, I was like, I think there's more here. I could do a little bit, play a bit more with this. And then Tuttle reached out to me. They asked me to do a book on manga. And manga is such a huge topic. And I thought, doesn't sound like much fun. I think I'd rather do a book on cats. so yeah, they got a book on cats instead of one-on-one book.
From not wanting to do a single talk to then doing a whole book about it.
Yes.
Okay, and you must have taken in thousands of pieces of art in making this book. What is a piece that you never tire of looking at?
Oh gosh, there are so many of them. I'm really happy to introduce in this book the artwork of Kumagai Morikazu, and that little kitty on the spine there, that's one of his cats. So I don't think he's not really well known in the West outside of Japan at all, but I first learned about him in around 2005 when I was living in Nagoya. I was teaching English, and he's from that area. And there's a little private museum up in the mountains that I went to visit. That a lot of his collection ended up in the Aichi Prefectural Art Museum in Nagoya. So I made this pilgrimage to his mountain home, and I just think he creates these wonderful, quite stylized, but incredibly sort of lively images of creatures and plants, and particularly cats. He was really a recluse. He barely left his own garden after having a series of strokes, so his health wasn't great. But he really, perfected the art of, I think, slow looking, and he painted dandelions and frogs and whatever else hopped into his garden, and including a lot of cats. And the technique he uses is really quite distinctive. He's got these sort of flat blocks of color with quite heavy outlines, sometimes sort of a reddish brown, sometimes in black. And I think he's someone who deserves to be better known in the West. I would love to buy one of his pieces for the museum, or personally for myself, but they just rarely come up for sale because they're just, he's absolutely beloved back home. So yeah, I would be very happy to look at one of his paintings every day. Yeah.
So cats seem to be the pet of choice for a lot of artists, Japanese or otherwise, like Georgia O'Keeffe and Salvador Dali. What do you think, after all of your work on this book, what do you think it is? What is the obsession?
I think there are many reasons, and I don't, artists seem to gravitate towards cats, and there are lots of surveys and research that, that your pet of choice also aligns with your political sympathies. And for some reason, progressive people tend to like cats. So I'm not going to make any comments about that, but I think certainly for Utagawa Kuniyoshi, who was one of the really top artists of ukiyo-e, or sort of prints, pictures of the floating world in the 19th century, and he had lots of cats in his studio. He always had plenty sort of pet cats, and I think they don't take up that much space. They don't, in theory, most of the time, they don't make that much of a mess. They can live inside. I think that's critical for Japan, where you take off, inside the home, it's always, keeping it clean is really important. You take off your shoes when you go inside. Cats were allowed inside. Dogs, not so much, because they kind of, they have different levels of personal hygiene, dogs to cats. We love you, dogs, but yeah, sometimes you're stinky. So I think that's part of it, just like being indoors, being around, being kind of quiet and self-contained, and of course it depends on the cat. Like my current cat, she is this skinny black thing, and the way, the plasticity of her body is just incredible. Like she can be, curled up on the sofa, and like literally her nose is like, the two ends of the alimentary canal are like this far away. She can get that small. And then she stretches out, and she's like, it looks like she's like 2 meters long or something like that, and gets really skinny. And just that incredible flexibility is just, you never tire looking at that, because it's just like, she's this living work of art, and so shiny and beautiful. And yeah, just as an object, this thing is incredible. So, yeah, just they're beautiful creatures.
Right. When you were speaking about the cleanliness of cats, there's, I think it's the second chapter of your book, where you get into sericulture and also cats used as rodent control. And I was shocked at the price of a cat back in, what was it, 1791? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, yeah, so in the 18th century, sericulture really took off in these kind of village areas of Japan. Sericulture, small, sort of, as a kind of cottage industry, as a way to sort of supplement your agricultural practice and this kind of cash crop. Farming households, peasants, members of the commoners were urged to start keeping silkworms. And the thing is, rats love silkworms. They are like this delicious little package of fat and protein, and just keeping silkworms will attract rats. So you needed something to protect your investment. Without having cats, you would basically, it wouldn't be economically viable. So there are records, diary records, that report that the price for cats was reached astronomical levels. Like, one cat is equivalent to a year's supply of rice. It's kind of hard to understand what those figures mean today, because ordinary people didn't actually eat white rice. That was kind of more of a currency. That's how they paid their taxes. So it's sort of hard to sort of figure out what that actually means, or to convert it into US dollars today. And then there, a few years later, I think, a superior cat is more expensive than a horse. I can't remember exactly what the ratio was, but it's somewhere in there. But yeah, it's just amazing to think, that's how valuable they were. And there's a whole ranking system of cats. So the best cats are said to be female cats. The worst mouses are orange males, apparently. So it's funny how today people always laugh at how stupid orange cats are, especially male orange cats. I don't know if they're stupid. I think
it's
they're
Garfield.
Just kind of, they don't want to work. That's okay. So yeah, the cats were very valuable livestock during the 18th and 19th centuries.
And what would you say makes Japan the undisputed sort of epicenter of cat culture?
Well, it's hard to go past Hello Kitty. She is a global phenomenon, international export in that sort of post-war period. So I think, people of my generation, we all grew up with Hello Kitty. But I also feel like Japan was, in terms of global culture, Japan was very quick to get on board with cat videos and to do it really well. So Maru, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Maru, who's this just very rotund Scottish fold, who lives, I think, in Nagano somewhere, and he's famous for diving into boxes, skidding across a room into a box, and just the production values of these videos are really, really very good, and quite distinctive, quite creative. There's something I remember when I was first started my PhD, and I was basically not sleeping, not eating, and watching Maru videos just kind of calmed me down. It was just sort of entered this sort of state of kind of meditation.
It's come full circle.
Very comforting, yeah. So I think, there's a lot of cats in popular culture. People often think like the cat cafe is a Japanese invention. It's not, it's actually Taiwanese, but I guess the customer base was overwhelmingly Japanese tourists in Taiwan, and then it quickly got exported to Japan and started mushrooming there. So I think it's multifaceted. So for 20th century global cat culture, those would be the sort of three main things, perhaps.
Okay, and you have an entire chapter on cats in humor and satire.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? And also sort of like the first ancient meme in that way?
Oh gosh, the first ancient meme. I mean, I think cats have always been, they lend themselves well to satire, and they really took off, I think, as a sort of vehicle of satire with Utagai Kuniyoshi, who, again, I mentioned him before. He was a very prominent artist of ukiyo-e. And there was a period of quite strict draconian censorship in the mid-19th century, and during that period, artists were really forbidden from depicting, and some of these laws had been in place, but they'd never really been enforced. But there was a strict kind of crackdown. Some of the laws were new, some of them were just kind of old ones that they're actually like, no, we're serious about this now. And so they weren't meant to depict current events. They weren't meant to depict kabuki actors that were recognizable. They weren't, all beautiful women who were actually courtesans. There were a lot of sumptuary laws that went along with this. So it was all about sort of, restoring sort of the public morality and reining in spending. And so Kuniyoshi had previously done quite a lot of actor prints. So he started using, replacing the actors with cats. And I believe there's they're quite, for people who know about kabuki, they can sort of decode these images and figure out which actor is meant to be which. Some of them are more obvious than others. Some of them you sort of think, well, he's just sort of obeying the letter of the law. But everyone actually is quite clear who these people are. So after, so that kind of got him really popularized cats as a vehicle of humor and satire. And then during the early Meiji period, so the 1870s, there's this huge burst of images of cats doing human things, like cats going to the bathhouse, which is kind of funny because cats really, of all animals, they don't need to go to the bathhouse. Going to school, that was a time when they introduced universal education, primary education, the early 1870s. So, cats being a kind of medium through which you could circulate new ideas and sort of try them out and sort of visualize and sort of think about how is society changing, and maybe sort of play with it, make it less serious, and just reflect upon what changes, what very, very rapid, in some ways quite traumatic changes were happening during that period of society.
Can you tell us a little bit about symbolism with cats, but more in Japanese culture? Because of course, I'm sure we're all familiar with a black cat crossing your path and the more occult associations that they can have here in the West.
Sure. I mean, I think in the West, yeah, there's a lot of negative associations, cats and bad luck. Cats are pretty neutral in Japan, and there's a whole chapter on demon cats. But generally speaking, I think cats were viewed in a fairly positive light. So the whole, so Maneki Neko, those are the beckoning cats that you see in many restaurants, originally mostly Japanese restaurants, but now convenience stores and Chinese restaurants and they're the poke store, Fushi Poke, has Maneki Neko, which is actually featured in this book. So these are, so the beckoning is supposedly to welcome in good fortune, good luck, etc. And there are various theories about how this came about. So this particular gesture with the waving cat, the earliest documented incidence of that is around the 1850s. But then there are much earlier myths that sort of talk about, so there is a story where a samurai is far from home and he's passing by an old temple in the middle of a storm, and a little cat comes out and sort of beckons happens to him, and he's sort of mystified, and he follows the cat, and just at that moment a bolt of lightning strikes down the tree and blows it to smithereens, and so that temple is now well, it was sponsored by his family, and it is reborn as Gotokuji, which is famous for the Maneki Neko, which are on the end papers of this book, and on the inside, if you open the cover, you can see millions of cats, it seems like. So it's associated with that as well. There are various other origin myths. I think people like to jump on the cat bandwagon, I suspect. It's good marketing if you've got a temple that could do with a little bit more patronage, but yeah. So those are lucky cats. There's also cat symbolism that comes from China. Cats as a symbol of happiness, longevity, marital harmony, as well, that got absorbed into Japanese culture. So you see them as an auspicious symbol in painting from 17th century onwards, 17th, 18th century onwards.
Can you tell us what surprised you most?
What surprised me most? I think really just like what a really rich subject this was, and of course, yeah, the big prices of cats in the 18th century. It's like, wow. I mean, now if you go to a city in Japan, you will see stray cats everywhere. And you think, these are cats that need homes. How could there ever have been such a shortage of cats? But I think, cats were not always so widespread. They were a hot commodity back then. I think one of the other things that this book gave me an appreciation for was how important cats are to human civilization, how and interspecies relationships are really critical to our success as a species. I remember reading years ago Bill Bryson's The Home, I believe that's what it's called. Is it like a history of the home? And he does touch on cats and vermin, and I remember after reading that chapter I was thinking, thank God we've got cats. But to really sort of go through some of this primary material about the critical role that cats played in controlling vermin back in sort of pre-industrial times, when people were forming cities and living together for the first time, and people didn't necessarily have the immunity that we sort of might take for granted today for a lot of these diseases that have been circulating, that start to circulate quite rapidly when people come together. And also for preserving your foodstuffs, like once you start storing grain, it's not like gold or cowrie shells or other kinds of commodities that don't spoil. Like, you've got to protect that, because otherwise your family will starve or your village will starve. So yeah, I think that was really something that I sort of vaguely understood or knew in theory, but thinking, oh wow, we actually we sort of joke about our cats don't contribute to the household, and we've got to go to work to keep them living the lifestyle that they're accustomed to, but it's like, actually, no, you should thank your cat for keeping the rats away. Yeah.
What questions do you all have? You just raise your hand. Robin?
I have too many questions, but the first one ties to next week when we are off to Kyoto and Tokyo. Do you have any recommendations on what we should see relating to cats?
Must see cats.
Go to Gotokuji and see more Maneki Neko in one place than you ever will again in your life.
In what temple?
Gotokuji temple, lots of Maneki Neko. So, and that's actually, it's a lovely temple. So, just outside of Tokyo, in the suburbs there.
This may sound like a joke question, but it's serious. Is there a lot of asthma in Japan because it's a small country and they live in small spaces? I mean, we would have a cat, but I live with someone who's very allergic.
I know a lot. When I lived in Japan, A lot of people complained about hay fever. Certainly, some people have cat allergies, but I think, you know, a lot of people in Japan, they live in small apartments, so they don't necessarily have a cat. So I'm not sure. I feel like we should ask a Japanese person. Makiko, what do you think? Do Japanese people have a lot of cat allergy? Is there a lot of cat allergy in Japan?
My brother has a cat allergy.
Yeah.
But we have a cat.
Mhm.
And we have a little like a flipped door for the cat, so the cat come and go in the house. I think the asthma, like when I grew up, there was not so many kids had asthma. But nowadays, somehow no asthma kids. I don't know why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What other questions?
Because I now spend most of my life just sitting in a chair and with my cat beside me, and to pet that cat gives me so much relaxation and it feels so good. But I remember a phrase that I read in some other place, that cats were once princesses and they never let you forget that. and so I say, well, are you in your princess mode today? but she understands me so much, and she gives me such comfort and enjoyment that I love her so much.
I think non-cat people who have not shared their lives with a cat, those unfortunate souls, there is this sort of perception that cats, you know, they don't return the relationship between humans and cats is kind of more one-sided, whereas dogs are really the man's best friend, and you know, you've got Lassie and all these loyal dogs through popular culture. What's really nice about Japanese history is there are lots of stories about cats sort of, you know, performing these great deeds of self-sacrifice for their human. There's a story about Usugumo, who was a high-ranking prostitute, and she had a cat in the bordello, and she was obsessed with this cat. You know, she was a real mad cat lady, and the brothel keeper was kind of like irritated by this because he thought, she's so weird, I'm going to lose money. So he tried to take the cat away from her, and she immediately got sick, and so gave the cat back. And anyway, on one occasion, the cat started behaving strangely, and was kind of following her around in it was sort of not really clear what sort of arose the suspicions of people, but they thought the cat was perhaps possessed, and the brothel the brothel cook was so distressed by the cat's behavior that he went to cut off its head with the kitchen knife, and the cat's head sort of shot off, sort of like this projectile, and ended up latching onto the body of a giant serpent that nobody had somehow noticed was living in the brothel. And so the cat was just trying to say, you know, raise the alert that there's like a murderous snake in the brothel and trying to protect his mistress. And so they all were, you know, terribly grief-stricken, and ended up enshrining this cat at a shrine nearby. So there are other stories like that as well, where cats really do, you know, rise up to protect their humans, and often meet quite gory ends in doing so.
That reminds me about, there's a section in your book in which you write about the cultural associations between felines and females. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know. That seems to be quite universal, isn't it? You know, cats are often seen as like sort of a woman's pet, especially, you know, sort of like sometimes quite unflatteringly, like, you know, young women who have a cat, they're never going to find a man, and like when you've given up on finding a man, you just get lots of cats. And I mean, I don't see what the problem is, but you can also have both. But yeah, there are some. So the word for cat in Japanese is neko, and the verb stem for sleep is ne, and a child or a girl is ko. So it's kind of like neko can be sleep girl, a girl who sleeps. So there is this kind of slang pun that a cat can be a prostitute. Yeah, there are a lot of stories that in which and imagery which kind of where the females and felines, especially sort of female sexuality and beauty, are quite conflated. So there's a story in The Tale of Genji, which is a 1,000-year-old novel that's said to be the world's first psychological novel, and there's quite a disturbing episode in it. There are two about the third princess, and the third princess is the young bride of Prince Genji, who's the hero of the grand epic, and he's quite old at that stage, and the third princess is actually his niece. In Heian period courtiers, they had less. They were always marrying cousins and stuff like that. Anyway, so it's not that weird in that context. But he's not really interested in her. She's very young. She's quite immature in his eyes, and he sort of ignores her. Gives her sort of her wing of the palace. One day, there are a group of young noblemen playing kickball in the yard, and she and her ladies-in-waiting are watching from inside her quarters, but she's standing up, and noble women didn't stand up in front of people, you sat down, and they were behind these bamboo blinds that provide them with some kind of privacy and modesty. You weren't meant to be seen by men outside of your family. And as they were watching the boys playing kickball, her pet cat on a leash, is suddenly chased by a bigger karaneko, a Chinese cat it's called, in the text. And they flip open the blind, and one of the young noblemen, Kashiwagi, sees her standing inside her chamber, like standing, oh my God, scandalous. And he sees her and he's instantly smitten. And this is seen as a great, word of this gets around, and it's seen as a great breach of etiquette. She could be so careless as to allow herself to be seen by a young man who isn't her family member. And he instantly, he's trying to meet her and have some kind of rendezvous with her. And he colludes with one of her ladies-in-waiting. And at some point, he manages to steal her cat, and he starts sleeping with it and, treating it as if it were a surrogate, treating it as a surrogate for the third princess. And it's actually quite creepy, I mean, it's not surprising at all. It is creepy, and then he ends up actually raping her, so it is very, very creepy. But yeah, that I think is one of the kind of more explicit and disturbing sort of episodes of, where women are really sort of conflated with cats in certain episodes of literature and the imagination, cultural imagination. Yeah.
All right, we need another question, not to end on that dark note. Go ahead, Robin.
Well, as well shown in your book, the association between cats and the demi-monde, the floating world, is very rich, and woodcut artists have depicted that, and you must have something to reflect on that subject matter as an artistic subject.
Yeah, there are certainly there are lots of cats in the floating world. Floating world, we generally think about as like the popular visual culture between the sort of 17th and 19th centuries, mid-19th centuries, mostly woodblock prints made for ordinary people. And yeah, I think consumers of ukiyo-e they loved their cats. Even if you didn't have your own cat, you could sort of partake in cat culture by perhaps buying or looking at a print. Kuniyoshi is really famous for his cat prints, but actually Utagawa Hiroshige did some wonderful images of cats, and also Katsushika Hokusai did some really wonderful cats as well. So I think, the inhabitants of the floating world, they were definitely cat people. Yeah. People keep on asking me, so when are you going to do a dog book? And it's honestly like, there just aren't that, there isn't that wealth of images. Dogs were mostly, as I mentioned earlier, they were outside, and they're just, the variety isn't there, I'm sorry. But yeah, I'm starting to collect them, but it might take me a while.
Well, the famous dog at Shibuya Station.
Yes, yeah. And there's actually, I think is it the upcoming Sotheby's or Christie's sale, there's a folding screen with, which is actually quite funny. It's a mother dog with 2 puppies, and there's a beautiful, sort of very elegantly appointed saddle in the background. So it's proper samurai gear, and one of the puppies is chewing the saddle. Cats don't do that usually.
Although the demon cat chapter of your
Yes.
book would say otherwise. Any last questions? Go ahead.
When you started working on the talk for your friend and then it worked out, did you start to look first more at the art, or did you hear about stories first and then that led
It really went hand in hand. So, I mean, a lot of the images of cats, you just at first glance, you have no idea what's going on here. So, you know, they're often depicting a story, and they might have some text in there, but it's often a very cursory sort of description of this episode that has actually been told and retold in kabuki and popular literature. So yeah, it was kind of like a little bit of, you know, looking at images, and then I'd read a whole lot more, and then I'd even find more images that relate to the story because I never knew about this story before. So yeah, it sort of exploded quite organically.
And if anyone hasn't yet purchased a copy of the book, we have them downstairs at the register. And I know you're happy to sign some
Absolutely.
books now too. So let's give another round of applause, and thank you guys so much for being here.